Have you ever heard a story so incredible it sounds like a myth? A tale of a young peasant girl who commanded an army, crowned a king, and became a legend. This isn't a fantasy novel. It's the true story of Joan of Arc, one of history's most fascinating and mysterious figures. How did a teenage girl from a small village change the course of a war that had raged for nearly a century? Stick around, because we about to journey back to 15th century France to uncover the astonishing life of the Maid of Orléans. To truly understand Joan's story, we need to understand the world she was born into. Imagine France in the early 1400s. It wasn't the unified country we know today. For decades, it had been locked in a brutal conflict with England, a dynastic struggle we now call the Hundred Years' War. The English and their allies, the Burgundians, controlled huge swaths of northern France. Including Paris, the French royal line was fractured. The heir to the throne, the Dauphin Charles, was uncrowned, in hiding, and seen by many as weak and illegitimate. The morale of the French people and their army was at an all-time low. It seemed like the fall of France was not just possible, but inevitable. It was into this desperate, war-torn world that a glimmer of hope was born in the small, unassuming village of Domremy. Around 1412, a girl named Jeanne d'Arc, or Joan of Arc as we know her, was born to a family of tenant farmers. By all accounts, she was a normal, pious child. She couldn't read or write, which was typical for a peasant girl of her time, but she was known for her deep religious devotion. Her life was simple, helping on the farm, spinning wool, and praying in the local church. Nothing about her early years suggested she would one day be leading soldiers into battle. But everything changed when Joan was about 13 years old. She claimed that one day, while in her father's garden, she was visited by a brilliant light and heard a voice. She identified this voice as belonging to Saint Michael the Archangel, who was soon joined by Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret. These heavenly voices, she said, gave her a divine mission. It was a mission that must have sounded impossible, even insane to a young girl. They told her she was destined to do two things: drive the English out of France and see the Dauphin Charles crowned as the rightful king in the city of Reims. For years, Joan kept these visions a secret, but the voices became more and more insistent. They were no longer just guiding her. They were commanding her. By the time she was 16, the military situation had become dire. The strategic city of Orléans, which sat on the Loire River, was under siege by the English. If Orléans fell, the rest of France would likely follow. The voices told Joan it was time to act. In 1429, she made her move. She traveled to the nearby town of Vaucouleurs to petition the local garrison commander, Robert de Baudricourt, for an escort to see the Dauphin. At first, he laughed her off. A peasant girl claiming a divine mission? It was absurd. But Joan was persistent. She returned, her conviction unwavering, and she started to win over the local people with her sincerity and passion. She made a startling prediction about a French military reversal near Orléans, and when news arrived that her prediction had come true, Baudricourt was finally convinced. He granted her an escort of several soldiers, and more remarkably, Joan cut her hair short and dressed in manus clothing for the perilous 11-day journey through enemy territory to the Dauphin's court at Chinon. Imagine the scene at the royal court. The Dauphin Charles was desperate, but also deeply suspicious. Was this girl a true messenger from God, or was she a heretic, a fraud, or even a witch? To test her, Charles disguised himself, hiding among his courtiers. But according to the legend, Joan, who had never seen him before, walked straight through the crowd and bowed before him, identifying him instantly. She then spoke to him in private, reportedly revealing secrets that only he and God could know. This private conversation convinced Charles. Whatever she said, it gave him the hope and confidence he so desperately needed. He agreed to let her go to Orléans. But first, she had to be examined by a panel of leading theologians in the city of Poitiers. They interrogated her for weeks, testing her faith and the nature of her visions. In the end, they found nothing heretical about her. They declared she was of good character and a true Christian. With the church's cautious approval, Charles gave Joan her own banner, a suit of white armor, and a place at the head of the army marching to relieve the siege of Orléans. When Joan arrived at Orléans, the French commanders were skeptical. They saw her as a mascot, a morale booster, not a military leader. They planned to be cautious, to slowly bring in supplies. But Joan had other ideas. She was aggressive, fearless, and she inspired the exhausted French soldiers in a way their own commanders couldn't. she rode among them, her banner flying, urging them to attack. She was not a commander in the tactical sense, she didn't draw up battle plans, but her presence was transformative. The soldiers who had been on the verge of defeat now believed they were part of a divine mission. They saw her as a living saint. With this newfound spirit, they launched a series of daring assaults on the English forts surrounding the city. During one fierce battle, Joan was wounded by an arrow to the shoulder. She pulled it out herself, had the wound dressed, and returned to the front lines to rally her troops for the final push. Her courage was infectious. Within just 9 days of her arrival, the English, demoralized and beaten, abandoned the siege. The Maid of Orléans, as she was now known, had achieved a victory that had seemed impossible. The lifting of the siege of Orléans was a massive turning point, not just militarily, but psychologically. It was the first major French victory in years, and it was attributed directly to this teenage girl. Joan's mission was only half complete, though. She insisted that they must now push on to Reims, the traditional city of coronation for French kings, deep within enemy territory. Her commanders thought it was too risky, but Joan's momentum was unstoppable. The army swept through the Loire Valley, winning a series of stunning victories. Towns that had been under English control for years opened their gates to her and the Dauphin. Finally, in July 1429, they reached Reims. Charles VII was officially crowned King of France in the great cathedral, with Joan of Arc standing beside him, her banner in hand. It was the symbolic peak of her career. She had fulfilled the second part of her divine prophecy. She had made a king. For a brief, glorious moment, it seemed that nothing could stop her. But war is never so simple. After the coronation, the French court began to split. Joan wanted to press the advantage and march on Paris immediately. But King Charles and his advisors favored diplomacy and negotiation with the Burgundians. The momentum was lost. An ill-prepared attack on Paris failed, and Joan was wounded again, this time by a crossbow bolt to the leg. The court's enthusiasm for her started to wane. Some nobles were jealous of her influence, and others began to doubt her now that she was no longer delivering constant, miraculous victories. In May 1430, during a minor skirmish outside the town of Compiègne, Joan was captured. The Burgundians, who were allied with the English, pulled her from her horse. She was now a high-value prisoner. King Charles, the man she had placed on the throne, made no attempt to rescue her or ransom her. It remains one of the most debated and tragic enactions in French history. After several months, the Burgundians sold her to their English allies, who were determined to destroy her, not just as a military threat, but as a symbol. The English put Joan on trial for heresy. This wasn't a military trial. It was a political and religious one, designed to discredit her and, by extension, the king she had crowned. If they could prove she was a witch or a heretic, then Charles's coronation would be seen as illegitimate, the work of the devil. The trial, held in the English stronghold of Rouen, was a sham from the start. It was run by pro-English clergy, led by the Bishop Pierre Cauchon. For months, Joan, an illiterate teenager, was interrogated by a panel of dozens of learned theologians and lawyers. They tried to trap her with complex theological questions. But the trial records, which survive to this day, show something extraordinary. Joan was brilliant. She was witty, clever, and steadfast in her faith. When asked if she was in God's grace, a trick question because claiming to know was heretical, she famously replied, "If I am not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God so keep me." Despite her bravery, the outcome was predetermined. Her primary crime, in the end, was her refusal to deny her visions and her insistence on wearing men's clothing, which was seen as an abomination. Under immense pressure and threats, she briefly signed a document of abjuration, renouncing her visions. But a few days later she recanted, put her men's clothes back on, and reaffirmed that her voices were from God. That sealed her fate. She was declared a relapsed heretic. On May 30th, 1431, at just 19 years old, Joan of Arc was taken to the marketplace in Rouen, tied to a stake, and burned to death. Even in her final moments, she held onto her faith, asking for a cross to be held up for her to see as the flames consumed her. But Joan's story doesn't end in the fire. Her death did not stop the tide she had turned. The French armies, inspired by her memory, continued to push back the English. The war she had so dramatically influenced finally ended 22 years after her death, with the French victorious. In the 1450s, King Charles VII, likely looking to secure the legitimacy of his crown, ordered a new trial. This posthumous retrial investigated the original proceedings and, in 1456, declared Joan innocent, nullifying the original verdict and pronouncing her a martyr. Hundreds of years passed, but her legend only grew. She became a powerful symbol of French nationalism and courage. In 1920, nearly 500 years after her death, the same institution that had condemned her, the Catholic Church, officially canonized her as a saint. The peasant girl who heard voices, led an army, and was burned as a heretic is now officially Saint Joan of Arc. Her story challenges us, inspires us, and continues to fascinate us, a timeless testament to the power of faith and the extraordinary impact one person can have on the course of history. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as incredible as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more journeys into the past. Let me know in the comments what you find most amazing about Joan of Arc's life. We'll see you in the next video.